Today, we're going to be checking out the Heavy Hatchet Preamp and Distortion pedal from Driftwood Amplification. This has been on my radar for a while. I am a big fan of Driftwood. Some of you might remember I got to borrow a buddy of mine's Darkest Nightmare amplifier, and I demoed that on the channel. Was really impressed with that. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, Driftwood is a German amp manufacturer. They make really cool high gain amps as well as a couple of pedals, obviously, and they also have a really sick tube preamp pedal that I really want to demo on the channel now, especially after this, but just with how good their amps sound. You know, every year at NAMM, I usually go by the booth as well and check them out because that's the only place where I can really play a Purple Nightmare, their flagship amplifier, and I've also tried their tube preamp as well as I did get to try this the last time I was at NAMM, and I was very impressed with all three of them. I mean, every year I try the Purple Nightmare and I'm impressed with it. A lot of people like to describe it as like a modern, refined take on a 5150 style amp, and I can definitely see that. It's definitely more American voice, but it has less compression than, say, a 5150. I feel like the mid-range is, while still cutting, less nasal. It's definitely harmonically more rich and just feels like a more refined amp. So I definitely get where people are coming from with that. And I really like how that amp sounds and feels to play. I would absolutely love to have a Purple Nightmare on the channel one of these days. That is, well, just to own too. That is definitely a bucket list amp for me. And then I could, compare it to all my other cool German amps like my Engel and my Lichtler and Prometheus. I think that would be awesome. You guys would be down to see that, right? A big German metal amp shootout. I think that'd be cool. So the Heavy Hatchet, what is it? Like I said at the beginning, it is a preamp and distortion pedal, and unlike a lot of other distortion and preamp pedals, this actually has something here that I think is a really good feature that more need, and that is a switch to go from preamp mode to distortion mode. Why is that important? Well, preamp pedals tend to have a lot more top end, be a lot more harsh if you use them as a distortion pedal, and the reason is they need that top end to go directly into a power amp or an IR to sound correct. And then when you have a distortion pedal, you don't want all that extra fizz, and that's why a lot of distortion pedals tend to sound darker inside the effects loop of stuff. And that's also why, like, the old school Metal Zone, which sounds like a can of bees into a clean channel, sounds actually pretty good as a preamp. It just has too much top end. So allowing you to toggle that top end and really dial this thing in as a distortion or a preamp, I think is a fantastic idea. A bunch of other really good ideas. It has a high and low here for how, high and low gain, so you can essentially have more of a crunch channel and then more of a lead channel, and you can actually switch that with the foot switch on the side, essentially giving you a 2-channel amp in a box style thing. And this truly is an amp in a box. It's really a rig in a box. I feel like you could build your whole rig, like a live rig around this, especially a fly rig. You could really design everything around this because it's got the built-in boost. The boost also has a cool option here where it has modern and vintage modes. So modern's more cutting, more tight, more aggressive, and vintage is a little bit fuller, a little less cutting on the top end. So just depending on what you want to use it for. And then it has a built-in noise gate, which is great. And a lot of noise gates on these kind of distortion and preamp style pedals, I feel like aren't usually all that great, and you kind of end up fighting it. I don't even notice this one's here. I just dial it in until the noise goes away, and then it closes nice. It never feels like it's getting in my way or stepping on notes. So they did a very good job there. And then it also has, what I really like here is that it has rumble and sharp controls. Now the rumble essentially is going to be like a resonance control. It really allows you to dial in the girth of the pedal. I felt like too low, everything was too thin; too high, it just gets too flubby. But oh man, at about like 2 o'clock, this thing just absolutely, just the palm mutes felt nice and big and girthy, and nothing was too muddy, but it still felt really full, like a real amplifier too. Like I was really taken aback at how much like a real tube amp it felt, just because I was able to get that low end dialed into where I wanted it. And then same with the sharp control. The sharp control is essentially a presence control, so you can really dial in the top end for whatever IR or power amp and cabinet that you're going into. So it really makes this thing a lot more versatile, so you can really dial it in for whatever you need. And then you can also use those when you're using it as a distortion to make sure that you're not overloading with too much top end or bottom end when you're going into a clean channel. And then the other controls are pretty self-explanatory. You have gain, volume, and then bass, middle, treble. So more volume, less volume, more distortion, less distortion, and then your EQ. And like I said, they're very 5150-ish, 6505-ish. And the way I prefer to set up my 6505 and my EVH 5153 is I like the 666 configuration, where bass, middle, and treble are all at about 6 o'clock. I feel like that's where they typically sound best, especially boosted. And funny enough, when I was dialing this thing in, I tried a bunch of different settings, and the 666 setting is what worked for me here and sounded best. This thing definitely lives in the mid-range, and just like a, one of their actual amplifiers. And so I was pleasantly surprised to see that I ended up setting it up exactly the same way to get the tones I wanted. So that about does it for all the features for the Heavy Hatchet. We're going to hear this thing outside of a mix in the exact same setup that I had it for the in-mix. So we're going to be plugging directly into this with my RIP Star Destroyer, which does have a Fishman Influence Modern in the bridge. And for the preamp, that's going to be going directly into the power section of my Lischler Prometheus. And then for the distortion, we're going to be going into the clean channel of that same amplifier. And then that's all going to be running into my 2-Notes Captor X, which I'm running my own personal blend of a DV77 and VM1265IR. It's mostly the DV77 though, just a little bit of the VM1265. And I do have a Dropbox link down below if you want to check that out. But let's twist some knobs and see how this thing sounds. As I've come to expect with Driftwood, I am very impressed by this little guy. It is absolutely nailing what it wants to do. It very much sounds and performs like an amplifier. A lot of these distortion pedals that are solid state can have, you know, weird upper end things going on, or maybe just too much top end fizz or whatever. This, I feel like the gain stack was really, really well defined and dialed in. I mean, you could absolutely play gigs with this, or even, you know, demo and record with this thing and have a whole rig built around it and do just fine. And I don't think anyone would really bat an eye at it. I certainly wouldn't. It sounds, like I said, fantastic. And this takes care of a lot of what you would need in a metal rig. It's got the gate built in, it's got the boost built in that you can switch, you have your presence and resonance controls. Really, all you need is maybe a good delay, maybe just your IR loader, or maybe it's like a power amp that you're running into. Like, you could really have a slimmed down, very good sounding rig with something like this. I am very, very interested in trying out their tube preamp pedal now, the bigger, larger one that I got to try at NAMM and sounded really, really good. But of course, you never know at NAMM, you want to just try at home in your own rig. But with everything that I've tried from them, I am very, very much hoping I get to check that out in the future. But stoked that Driftwood sent this over for me to check out. Wondering if you guys have checked this out or anything else from Driftwood. I feel like this has kind of gone way under the radar for a lot of people for distortion and preamp pedals, and I think that's a shame, because this is easily one of the best ones I've ever tried. You know, I'd be interested to know your thoughts. Leave your comments down below, and of course, I will have a link to this and everything else from Driftwood. But thanks for watching. Stay metal.